Number 1. Human touch. If you touch a baby bird or its eggs, the parents will smell your scent and abandon them forever. Wildlife rehabilitation brochures from the 1960s through 2005 warned against handling fallen nestlings. Summer camp nature programs taught it as fundamental bird biology. The claim has prevented well-meaning people from helping injured birds for over 6 decades. But most bird species have extremely poor senses of smell and do not detect human scent on their young. Parents return to nests and continue caring for offspring regardless of human contact. The warning seemed grounded in protective maternal instinct observed across animal species. Early ornithological literature in the 1940s and 1950s extrapolated from mammalian behavior, where scent plays a crucial role in offspring recognition. Naturalists assumed birds employed similar olfactory-based parental bonding. Without controlled experiments testing avian olfactory capabilities, the mammalian model appeared universally applicable. Wildlife management guides from 1955 through 1990 instructed the public never to touch wild birds or eggs, citing risk of parental rejection. The National Audubon Society's 1968 educational pamphlet, Found Birds What to Do, stated, "Human scent on eggs or chicks will cause parents to abandon the nest. Observe from a distance only." State fish and wildlife agencies incorporated this guidance into public education programs throughout the 1970s and 1980s. The warning appeared protective and cautious, erring on the side of wildlife welfare by minimizing human interference. This belief has a specific starting point. Understanding why it lasted matters more. The scent rejection claim originated from limited understanding of avian sensory biology. Early ornithologists conducted extensive behavioral observations but lacked the neuroanatomical and experimental tools to assess olfactory function accurately. The assumption that birds operated like mammals, using scent for offspring recognition, went untested for decades. But the myth served institutional purposes beyond biology. Wildlife rehabilitation organizations faced overwhelming numbers of birds brought in unnecessarily by the public. By 1980, rehabilitation centers were receiving thousands of healthy fledglings each spring from people who assumed ground birds needed rescue. The "don't touch" warning, even if scientifically inaccurate regarding scent, reduced inappropriate interventions. When ornithological research in the 1970s and 1980s demonstrated poor olfactory capabilities in most bird species, findings appeared in journals like The Auk and Condor, never reaching public education materials. The National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association continued using scent-based warnings through 2003. As of 2023, state wildlife agency websites in 9 US states still cite human scent as a reason not to handle baby birds. Here's what the actual research shows. Dr. Bernice Wenzel at UCLA published extensive studies from 1968 through 1987, demonstrating that most bird species possess poorly developed olfactory bulbs and limited scent detection capabilities. Exceptions include turkey vultures and kiwis, which use smell for foraging. Dr. Kenneth Abel at the State University of New York documented in 1996 that songbird parents return to nests regardless of human handling, showing no rejection behavior based on scent. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology confirmed in 2008 that parent birds rely on visual and auditory cues, not olfactory ones, for offspring recognition. Ornithologists now recognize that bird rejection of nestlings results from prolonged absence or visible injury, never from human scent. Yet wildlife education materials distributed by state agencies in 2019 still listed scent as a rejection risk. This matters because the scent myth has caused thousands of healthy fledglings to be unnecessarily removed from parental care when people refuse to return grounded birds to nests. When wildlife guidance operates on mammalian behavioral models rather than avian sensory biology, we're preventing appropriate interventions that would improve survival. And this same pattern of metabolic observation creating false physiological assumptions is exactly what happened with myth number 2. But that aerodynamic misunderstanding has persisted even longer than any scent-based warning. Number 2. Constant flight. Hummingbirds must fly constantly or they'll die. Their metabolism is so fast that stopping means starvation or cardiac arrest within minutes. Nature documentaries from the 1970s through the 2000s emphasized their perpetual motion. Educational materials describe them as the only birds incapable of walking or perching for extended periods. The claim has defined public understanding of hummingbird physiology for over 50 years, but hummingbirds perch regularly throughout the day and enter energy-conserving torpor states at night. Flight represents only a fraction of their daily activity. The belief appeared scientifically justified by metabolic measurements. Physiologists in the 1950s and 1960s documented that hummingbirds possess the highest mass-specific metabolic rates of any vertebrate, heart rates reaching 1,200 beats per minute during flight, consuming energy at rates requiring feeding every 10 to 15 minutes. Researchers calculated that such extreme energy expenditure would deplete reserves rapidly if feeding ceased. Early ornithology textbooks, including Austin's Birds of the World, 1961, and Welty's The Life of Birds, 1962, described hummingbirds as living at the edge of survival, with metabolic demands requiring near constant flight and feeding. The National Geographic Society's 1973 film, Hummingbirds Magic in the Air, narrated, "These tiny dynamos can never truly rest. Their furnace-like metabolism demands perpetual motion." The physiological measurements appeared definitive. Extraordinary metabolic rates seem to necessitate continuous activity. The roots of this myth go deep. The forces that protected it go deeper. The constant motion narrative emerged from selective observation during peak activity periods. Researchers filmed and photographed hummingbirds during daylight feeding hours when the birds were most visible and active. Perching behavior, which occupies 70 to 80% of daylight hours, received minimal documentation or emphasis because stationary birds provided less dramatic footage. Documentary storytelling amplified the misconception. Nature filmmakers focused on spectacular hovering flight and high-speed aerial maneuvers, creating a visual record that reinforced perpetual motion. By 1985, the "never stops flying" narrative had become standard in wildlife programming. When ornithological research in the 1980s documented regular perching, torpor, and energy conservation strategies, findings appeared in the Auk and Physiological Zoology, never reaching documentary producers or educational content creators. The BBC's Life of Birds series in 1998 still emphasized relentless energy demands, requiring near constant flight. As of 2022, elementary science textbooks from two major publishers describe hummingbirds as always in motion, without mentioning perching or torpor. Here's what the actual research shows. Dr. William Calder at the University of Arizona documented in 1994 that hummingbirds spend 75 to 80% of daylight hours perched, conserving energy between feeding bouts. Dr. Donald Powers at George Fox University demonstrated in 1991 that hummingbirds enter torpor, a hibernation-like state reducing metabolic rate by up to 95% every night, allowing survival through 8 to 12-hour periods without feeding. Dr. Susan Wethington's research at the Hummingbird Monitoring Network confirmed in 2005 that territorial hummingbirds perch on exposed branches for hours, making brief flights only to chase intruders or feed. Ornithologists now recognize that extreme metabolic rates during flight make energy conservation through perching and torpor essential, not impossible. This matters because the perpetual motion myth misrepresents fundamental hummingbird physiology, teaching students that high metabolism eliminates rest when it actually necessitates sophisticated energy management. When educational materials emphasize spectacular flight footage while ignoring the stationary behavior that occupies most of the bird's life, we're presenting metabolic extremes without the regulatory strategies that make them sustainable. And this same pattern of seasonal observation creating false lifetime assumptions is exactly what happened with myth number 3. But that reproductive mythology has shaped wildlife storytelling for nearly a century. Number 3. Lifelong mates. Penguins mate for life. Once paired, they remain faithful partners until death. Wildlife documentaries have romanticized penguin monogamy for generations. The narrative appears in children's books, animated films, and natural history museum exhibits. The claim has become synonymous with penguin identity for over 80 years. But most penguin species show high divorce rates, with some populations exceeding 75% mate switching between breeding seasons. Lifetime pair bonds are the exception, not the rule. The romantic narrative seems supported by field observations. Early Antarctic explorers and ornithologists in the 1910s through 1940s documented penguins returning to the same breeding colonies annually and observed pairs reuniting. Apsley Cherry Garrard's 1922 account, The Worst Journey in the World, described emperor penguins as faithful companions through the Antarctic winter. Without long-term individual tracking across multiple seasons, observers interpreted seasonal pair bonds as lifetime commitments. Ornithology textbooks from 1950 through 1985 describe penguin monogamy as exemplary among birds. The 1958 film White Wilderness and subsequent nature documentaries through the 1990s presented penguins as models of lifelong devotion. The American Museum of Natural History's penguin diorama, installed in 1962, included educational text describing permanent pair bonds formed for life. The observation appeared straightforward. Pairs reunited each season. Therefore, they remain together permanently. Track this back to its source and you'll find a clear culprit. But the persistence? That's systemic. The myth originated from short-term observations that captured seasonal fidelity but lacked multi-year tracking of individual birds. Early researchers observed 1 or 2 breeding seasons, insufficient to document mate-switching patterns that occur over lifetimes spanning 15 to 20 years. The assumption of permanence filled gaps in longitudinal data, but narrative appeal cemented the myth culturally. The monogamous penguin became a powerful storytelling device in wildlife media, a symbol of devotion in Earth's harshest environment. By 1990, the romantic narrative had generated substantial commercial value. The 2005 documentary March of the Penguins, which grossed $127 million worldwide, emphasized emperor penguin pair bonds without mentioning divorce rates. When long-term banding studies in the 1980s and 1990s revealed high mate-switching rates across species, findings appeared in specialized journals like the Orc and Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology, never reaching mainstream wildlife media. The Monterey Bay Aquarium's penguin exhibit educational materials continued describing lifetime partnerships through 2014. As of 2024, 3 major aquarium penguin exhibits still use signage emphasizing monogamy without quantifying divorce rates. Here's what the actual research shows. Dr. Pierre Jouventin at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique documented in 1982 that emperor penguins show approximately 15% annual divorce rates. Pairs separate and choose new mates if previous breeding attempts failed. Dr. Tony Williams at Simon Fraser University demonstrated in 1995 that Adelie penguins exhibit divorce rates near 50%, with mate switching increasing after unsuccessful breeding seasons. Dr. Michelle LaRue at the University of Minnesota confirmed in 2015 that some penguin populations show divorce rates exceeding 75%, driven by breeding failure and asynchronous arrival at colonies. Ornithologists now recognize that penguins employ flexible mating strategies, maintaining pairs when breeding succeeds, switching mates after failure. This research has been peer-reviewed and publicly available for over 40 years. This matters because the lifelong monogamy myth teaches millions of museum and aquarium visitors that reproductive strategy is fixed instinct when it's actually flexible behavior responding to breeding outcomes. Antarctic research documented mate switching in 1982, yet public education materials in 2024 continue presenting permanent pair bonds, a 42-year gap between field research and institutional messaging. How many other complex reproductive strategies are we reducing to romantic narratives that served early documentary storytelling? When wildlife education operates on 1920s observational assumptions rather than decades of individual tracking data, we're teaching children that animal behavior follows human storytelling preferences instead of evolutionary pressures that maximize reproductive success across variable environments.